So welcome to the Leadership Lounge. It's great to have you here with us. With me again this month is Anna Hennell Jones.
Hello, lovely to be with you.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
It has. It's great to have you back.
Good to be back.
We're going to be looking today at the topic of radical candor, and that means caring personally whilst challenging directly. It was popularized by the former Apple and Google executive Kim Scott and her book called Radical Candor. And it means being honest and clear with people while showing genuine respect and support. So, Anna, here we are in the Leadership Lounge. So, at the root of this whole topic is the fact that sometimes people just find it really difficult to have those challenging conversations. So, why do so many leaders find it difficult?
I think it fundamentally stems from a fear. From fear of upsetting people, fear of perhaps being unpopular if you challenge people, and fear of conflict, the kind of pushback or kickback you may get if you do challenge somebody. So when it all seems a bit scary and we're a bit afraid of it, then we tend to avoid it.
Yeah. So there's a fear. So people hold back because they're fearing the negative consequences of this conversation. So what's the impact then of avoiding those conversations?
Fundamentally, nothing changes. If you don't raise issues, deal with them, talk to people about them, you are not giving that person opportunities to grow and develop, because they obviously won't know that they're not getting something quite right. Performance doesn't improve. So overall, fundamentally, your organisation, whatever your organisation is, suffers because as a leader, you haven't had that conversation.
So it affects the whole organisation.
Yes. Yeah.
Not just the individual.
Yeah. It's the ripple effect of that, because if one part of your organisation, one person in your team is not performing at the level you need them to be, or is not doing the job you need them to do, then that has a knock-on effect for everybody else, and the organisation ultimately is what suffers. And I think if we're honest, we will all have had times when we have shied away from having those conversations with people because of all the things we've just spoken about. So what's happening, Colin, psychologically, when we choose that silence over honesty with somebody?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a bit like you imagine a set of balance scales. And what's happening is we're thinking, I need to have a conversation with this person about this issue, whether that's a performance issue, whether it's a personal issue that's then affecting performance or affecting relationships. And so the set of balance scales is you're thinking the reasons about the consequence if I have this conversation, the negative consequences. Yeah. So if I have the conversation, they might get upset with me, it might spoil our relationship, they might not want to talk to me again. So that side is tipping the scales rather than us thinking about the other side. So I think that's the first thing, is it's a set of balance scales. I think the other thing that's happening psychologically is it's what the person is telling themselves about the conversation, and actually about themselves as well. Because in one sense, they're telling themselves, I'm not skilled enough to have this conversation, because if I have this conversation, it's going to go wrong. And so what the person is doing is almost filtering this conversation through a whole series of other conversations. Oh, when I had the conversation with Bernard, when I had it with Jemima, it went wrong before, or I have seen it go wrong with this person, or they're looking at the behavior of the other person in those kind of contexts and therefore are telling themselves. So what's happening is there's a confirmation bias that they're filtering it through. Some of that will be about the person they're having the conversation with, and some of it will be about what they're telling themselves about themselves and the skill in their conversation.
So how is radical candor different? What's the psychology behind that approach then?
I think if we think about the definition of radical candor, caring personally while challenging directly, I almost feel that that core bit about caring personally is key. Because I care personally, I need to have this challenge conversation. And I think that's what can change the psychology of it. Because I think when we have our conversations, we often think about the what. So we might be thinking, oh, I'm going to have a conversation with Bernard about his body odor because everyone's complaining about his body odor and people feel very uncomfortable working near him because of his body odor. So we concentrate on the what of the conversation, which is his body odor, which is very personal, isn't it? To tell someone you smell is difficult.
That's a tricky one.
Yeah, but the psychology behind it, if I care personally for Bernard, and if I care personally for the colleagues, now this changes my approach to the conversation because I'm now thinking more about my why of the conversation than the what. The what is the lack of deodorant and the smell. Or it might not be actually, he might be using deodorant, it might just be his clothes are still holding the smell. But whatever it is, there's a smell. That's the what. The why of the conversation, because I care for Bernard, actually is about relationship with his colleagues. This now becomes a much more important driver for my conversation and my reason why I need to be clear. Because if I don't get clear with Bernard, it will continue. And therefore the why of the conversation, which is his personal relationship, will continue to be a bit broken and fractured. Now Bernard might not even fully realise yet. He might just think, well, nobody seems to hang around me. But it's because I care for him, I need to have this frank conversation. So I think that's where the psychology perhaps changes and focuses more on the why of your conversation than on the what of the conversation. So as I've just said, I know I like to think about the root of it is because I care for you, I have to talk to you about this. It's such an important driver that because I care for you, I must do this. Because I care for you, I must call this straight so that you respond and sort it out. Because if I don't, the consequences for you are just so unkind or so unhelpful. So it's going back to that balance scale again, isn't it? That now we're tipping it to the reason why I must have this conversation. You're too valuable for me not to have this frank conversation. So if this is the case, what makes it so hard for us to still have those honest conversations with people? You got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think the care part of this is really key, and it's obviously it's really important that when you are caring about somebody, you are honest with them. But sometimes we can care too much for somebody, and it can almost be then that because we care so much and we're very mindful of them, and we might know, for example, Bernard might be having a really hard time in his personal life at the moment. So am I really going to land him with this issue? Might be kind not to wait for another time. So you're over caring and you're thinking about Bernard and just thinking from his perspective means you're placing Bernard above the organisation, and you don't tackle that issue with Bernard because you almost care too much for him. The flip side of that would be actually you don't care enough. You actually don't care about Bernard in the way that you should when he's a member of your team and part of your organisation. You don't have that personal care for him. You are not invested in him growing and developing, having better relationships with his work colleagues. So you just let the issue go, almost like, well, that's Bernard's problem, not mine. So you don't care enough to raise it and to support him in dealing with it. It can also come from the culture within your organisation. If your organisation has a culture where rather than talking to people, you talk about them, then you might not raise it with Bernard, but you will be commenting behind his back of every time somebody comes to you and says, I've got a bit of an issue with Bernard, you go, oh yeah, his body odour is really bad, isn't it? So you're talking about him, not raising the issue with him and talking to him. And I think another key thing that is probably one of the most difficult ones to kind of unpick and manage is actually how honest you are with yourself. So it's very easy in situations like this, particularly with something so personal, so it's Bernard's body odour, to kind of fudge it and to have a sort of conversation
Mm.
without really mentioning it. And then you're telling yourself, no, I spoke to Bernard about it, I dealt with it, but you haven't actually directly addressed it. You've maybe made some little comment that you're hoping he will A, hear the comment, and B, interpret what it is you meant by that, without you actually saying, Bernard, I need to talk to you about your body odour. So it's that honesty with yourself, and sort of convincing yourself you've dealt with it when actually you haven't.
I mean, it sounds like in all of that, though, the balance scales still aren't right, is it? In terms of, you said, first of all, about have we balanced the needs of the organisation against the needs of the person, e.g. Bernard, as we've just had this imaginary character. You know, haven't quite got it right there. And even actually, when we're talking about Bernard rather than to Bernard, that balance scale still isn't right. There still isn't that caring personally for Bernard within it, is it? So in one sense, I think what we're picking up is one of the reasons people still find this difficult is they've not really earthed it in that empathy for Bernard, and they haven't got that balance right. In terms of, even sometimes people are going, oh yeah, but I might upset. That's almost the empathy overplaying.
The caring too much.
Because he'll then really feel it, and he'll get really upset and take it personally. And so that still isn't right. But then there is also not that balance right in us going, but unless I have this conversation, it's going to continue. And this actually isn't kind to allow this
to carry on.
So our understanding around kindness, I think, sometimes is what can tip the balance. Sometimes we think kindness is just about keeping it all soft and level and nice within that little parameter, whereas actually kindness, you know, we have that phrase, be cruel to be kind, which actually isn't right either, is it? Because we shouldn't be being cruel, but it is about clarity for kindness.
That clarity for kindness is a useful way to think of it.
So we're unpicking that radical candor, actually being clear and frank with people, driven by kindness, can still be hard for people because they haven't got the balance right. But so what does radical candor actually look like in practice? And what we're really talking about is having the frank conversations, you know, with care.
I think first of all, it's that noticing when something isn't right. It's as a leader being in tune, being aware, picking up on those things, and in the first instance recognizing that there is an issue that needs to be addressed, whatever that might be. And then it's addressing it with the relevant person in a caring and non-confrontational way, so that it's done kindly, it's done with tact, it's done privately, not in front of everybody else, and that it is done in a way that offers support if that is appropriate and needed. And I think one of the key things is about, address it with the relevant person. Quite often, if there is an issue, it can seem easier to say, well, I'll just mention it to everybody at the next team meeting or the briefing. And effectively, you're hoping that the right person picks up on it and realize it. And of course, 99.9% of the time, you can guarantee what will happen is those people for whom it's not an issue are suddenly panicking, going, oh my goodness, have I got body odor? Am I not showering enough? Am I not using the right deodorant? And Bernard is blissfully ignorant and is just like, oh, well, that can't possibly apply to me. It doesn't work. No. It's a cop-out. It's really easy to do. And again, there's that telling yourself, well, I've addressed it and dealt with it because I've told everybody, but you haven't raised it with the right person. So it's raising it with the person with whom it needs to be raised.
So it needs to be specific to them. And what you've said as well, it needs to be in private, and it needs to be with that sense of clarity. So our listeners are probably thinking, it all sounds really good. And if I think about in my coaching, this is the topic probably that comes up the most, how to hold those difficult or challenging conversations. And of course, as soon as we put the title difficult conversation, it becomes a difficult conversation. So our listeners and watchers are probably thinking, but yeah, but okay, fine, Colin and Anna, we get that needs to be clear. We get we need to reframe and re-understand kindness, that kindness actually is about clarity. We get that we need to have some form of empathy, but what does that actually look like? So in terms of a structure for having a radical candor conversation, have you got any ideas on what's a good structure for that?
I think it's about thinking about the time and place for the conversation. So if you know you need to talk to somebody, it's not a good idea, to grab them as they're trying to leave the office at 5:30 on a Friday and go and start their weekend. That's not the time for going, oh, could I just, have a quick word. So think about the time and the place, somewhere that is quiet, private, away from everybody else. And importantly, when you've got sufficient time, this is not a conversation that you look in your diary and go, I've got a 10-minute window there, I'll cram it in. Because you don't know how long it's going to need. You don't know what reaction you are going to get. So you need to have a buffer of time so that if needs be, you can support the person through that conversation that you're having with them. So time and place are important. And then be very clear about what the issue is that you are raising. You can't be woolly about it, and it's not an opportunity to go, oh, well, I could also just mention that as well. You need to be focused and clear on the purpose of this conversation and basically what behavior or performance you want to change. Be clear in your own mind of why that's important. So what is the impact of this behavior, whatever, on the rest of the team, on the organization, so that you are not sitting being very generalized or waffly. You have got clear examples, you've got clear evidence of what the impact is, and therefore it is clear what needs to change. So you are giving somebody that real clarity on it. It's not some vague wishy-washy thing. And then you've made clear the issue, your expectations. It's then about, right, so I've now landed this on you, Bernard. What can I do to help? Is there anything that I can do to help you with this? I mean, obviously body odor is quite a personal thing, so you would hope Bernard could manage that on his own. But if it's a performance issue, is this somebody new to the role that perhaps needs some more training or input? It's not fair just to go, this is an issue, crack on and sort it out. It's about making sure the person has the right skills, knows where to go to upskill themselves if needs be, has the support, and that you are there to help them because you care. You want them to succeed in addressing this. So what can I do to help you? And if it is a performance related issue, when are we going to revisit this to see how it's going? So it's time bound as well.
So there's a lot of clarity in that again, isn't there? So it's being clear on what the issue is and specifics. And you talked about give some specifics as well, which I would totally agree with, because it gives them less wiggle room then. And then being clear on what it is that you need to achieve this. And you talked about, skills. If it is a performance issue, which bits do you feel okay with? Which bits do you not? And so you're asking them to give clarity on what they need help with as part of that process. And then you talked about that clarity at the end. When will we meet again, particularly if it's a performance related issue, to see how things are going? So what are some of the perhaps good radical candor conversations that you've had then, having given us that kind of clarity that you've talked about? What are some of the best ones that you've had? Without obviously mentioning individuals' names.
Years and years and years ago, when I was fairly new to a role, the building we were working in needed some reorganisation because the person who was running the office had a big space right at the front of the building, nice window with a nice view. But it meant everybody coming in, the reception space was further down. So everybody had to walk past this to get to the reception space. And obviously it made much more sense for the reception space to be the first thing you come to. So we had some design people in and the building people come in for a meeting to look at the restructure of this space, and the person who sat in this lovely office at the front in front of these people, so they're not part of our organisation, they are effectively visitors and coming in to advise, very bluntly objected and was basically saying, I don't see why I should have to move, I like my office, this isn't fair, you know, giving it quite a lot of verbal stuff, which I just shut down as best I could. And when the visitors had gone, one of whom said to me, oh, I bet they're a handful to manage, aren't they? And I was, you know, I hadn't been there very long, and I was quickly discovering this person could be quite a handful to manage. And I thought, if I don't tackle or challenge this, that's seen as acceptable behaviour. So I asked them to grab a cup of tea, come into my office, want to chat over a few things, and was very clear that I was not happy about the way in which the concern around moving office, etc., had been raised, particularly in front of people from outside of the organisation, because of the impression that gave people about our organisation and how we behave as an organisation, but also, you know, critically for that person, said, what impression have those people left here about you and how you behave and how you feel about being part of this organisation? I imagine they have the impression that you don't very much value or enjoy being here. And that person was a bit taken aback, but did have the decency to say, I haven't thought about it like that before. Was just used to very much voicing their opinion whenever and wherever, and not thinking about the impression that was giving, not only of the organisation, but of them as a person. So that was a kind of, you know, short, sharp, have this conversation. That's not a great way to be behaving for these reasons, and think about how it reflects on you. And that moved on. Another one.
So just before we move on to the other one, so pulling out that for our listeners, again, there's a real clarity on what the issue was and when it was. So again, there's the specifics. So it means people can't say, no, I didn't. You're really clear on when it happened and what it was that was said. And there's a real clarity in there around the impact that had on our reputation, impact that had on also on her reputation as well. To enable her then to see, oh yeah, actually I hadn't seen it that way. Yeah.
And then another one was a colleague who worked incredibly hard managing all of the finance, data, compliance systems within the organisation, and had to provide regular reports to the rest of the team, to you know, senior people. And was spending hours on these reports, hours and hours and hours, but there was so much information in them. It was quite hard as you read it and were trying to digest it to sort of understand which bits were the key ones to focus on. And when we were having meetings, because the reports were so lengthy and so jam-packed full, we wouldn't always get through everything. And sometimes the thing that was maybe the most important, the decision that needed to be made, was falling off the bottom because it hadn't been flagged high enough up. So we had a really good conversation around it, where I can honestly say, I know that you're working really hard to produce these, and there's a huge amount of information, and I appreciate that there's a lot we need to cover, but I'm finding it really hard, not being a finance data person, to know what I should be focusing on. And I think sometimes we're not getting decisions made as quickly as we need to, because I suspect other people are finding it quite hard to unpick from all this information what's the key things. So we talked together about what I might find a bit more helpful. And over a period of time, you know, the reports were changed and tweaked. And we ended up with a format where things were clearly labelled as either this is just for information, you need to know there's been this legislative change. This item is where we need to make a decision, and these are our options, and this would be the one that, you know, I'm recommending because I'm the person that knows about the data and whatever, for these reasons, but obviously then it can be discussed. So that meant people had real clarity. You know, the report lands, they can go through, right, that's for information. These are the bits I really need to unpick because this is where we've got to make a decision. And in the meeting, really focus on the bits that were decision making. And that ended up being a format that was really well received by the wider team, and actually other departments took on using that format for their reporting because it just made things so much clearer. So that was where somebody was already doing a good job, but it was almost like too much for other people who weren't experts in that field to unpick it all.
Yeah. So again, what I'm picking up is the clarity that you're giving them around what was needed from that report, and then working with them to help rectify it.
Yeah, to find a way that worked for them so they felt they were giving all the information the rest of the team needed to have and be aware of. But ordered and summarised in such a way as it's like, this is the bit to really worry about. Be mindful of this, but this is the key thing that we need to be sorting. So it kind of kept everybody happy.
Yeah. So again, picking out the impact of when the report structured this way, this is the impact that if we were to structure it this way, then this would be the more positive impact, so that they could see your motive for the conversation as well. And if we're bringing out the radical candor bit, the radical is obviously the caring side of it. You ultimately did want success for this person as well.
This is somebody who was working really, really hard and trying really, really hard. But this was a little element of their work that was almost masking all the good work they were doing because people just couldn't see the wood for the trees.
So in terms of radical candor, any that have gone wrong for you, without again mentioning names?
I think we'd all be lying if we said every time we, you know, tackled an issue with people, it all went, you know, swimmingly well and the issue was resolved. So I remember an occasion where a colleague who could be quite feisty and forthright and blunt, I suppose, is a word for the approach. And the person was aware of it and had actually said to me, I know I can be like that. If you feel I'm being like that, can you just let me know so I can rein it in a bit? And we had a team meeting where this person was really quite openly aggressive in their questioning of a colleague about something and demanding lots of information and detail that, you know, you wouldn't necessarily ordinarily have at your fingertips. If you'd been asked in advance, you could have prepped some of it. And not only asking for things in an aggressive way, but every time the other person is trying to answer is also jumping in with that, and I want a bit, and what about this? You know, so this other colleague is being bombarded with this. It's quite aggressive. There's no chance to respond, and it would have been much more helpful if the questions had been raised in advance, you know, at the meeting, just so, you know, I really want us to talk about this. So the other colleague could go, right, I need to get all these facts and figures together. So I did, after the meeting, raise it with them and say, you know, you asked me to tell you, and I think that, you know, in that meeting, that approach was unfair, and think about how it's left your colleague feeling. And basically, I just got both barrels back. What about how I'm feeling? That's not fair. You're now telling me I'm, you know, really highly emotive response. But I can reflect and think that I didn't manage it as well as I could have done, because in my eagerness, thinking, well, you asked me to tell you, so I'm going to tell you, I had the conversation by telephone, which was the worst thing I could have done.
Right.
I'd seen a window of I've got a meeting here and a meeting there. I'll just make a quick phone call because they asked me to tell them. So I'm going to, do what they asked and tell them. So doing it by phone was really not a good move.
And that links a bit to what you were saying earlier about making sure when you've got time, so you're not rushing it, you squeezed it into a window.
Squeezed it into a window and therefore did it by telephone. I also made it about somebody else's feelings, and that is straight away going to be emotive for most people.
Yeah.
And what I should have done was made it about the impact on the effectiveness of the meeting and the wider team. That when issues are raised that a colleague is not prepped or prepared for, it means we can't have a meaningful discussion. And when lots of questions are asked one after the other, it's quite hard for everybody to follow the train of thought and what is the point and the issue that is being raised.
Yeah.
So that would have depersonalized it. And because I'd launched in with, so think about how this other person is feeling, that was very inflammatory.
Yeah.
Not my finest moment.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you had that conversation with them and they wanted that feedback, but when you gave them the feedback, it wasn't well received. And you've been able to identify the things within your control that you might have done differently, such as not on the telephone, focusing on a different aspect that perhaps was more concrete. However, I'm also hearing this and wondering whether one of the lessons for our listeners as well is if someone is in a similar situation where someone has said, do tell me if ever I am too whatever, that might be too loud, too aggressive or whatever, too forthright, please tell me. It's then up to us at that point to really talk through with them, well, what will this look like then that will enable you to take the feedback. So I remember doing an exercise with a group of people years ago. Actually, we talked about if one of us goes mad, bad or sad, what phrases will we use, what language is going to help one another to accept the message, and getting really clear on that so that people know we're in that boat as well. So I'm wondering for our listeners, if they're ever in that boat as well, to really get clear, if I'm going to give you this feedback, when, where, how, what language is going to enable you to accept this. And I guess it's also partly us thinking, we mentioned earlier, timing of this, because maybe that person was also still a bit fired up from the meeting, and they needed to calm themselves. So it is talking to them about when, in terms of timing, for any of that kind of feedback.
It's effective as what you're saying, Colin. It's setting some boundaries around it, isn't it? You've asked me to give you some feedback. What are the boundaries we're both going to set around it so that I feel comfortable giving you the feedback and you are going to be in a position where you can receive it?
Yeah, and you've agreed that beforehand.
And I know, Colin, that in thinking about some of these trickier situations, you've got a 5P collaborative conversation process, which might help. So can you tell us about that?
And in some ways it picks up on the elements that you've talked about beforehand. So there are 5 simple Ps if you're going to have a conversation with someone that is going to be a challenging conversation. But the approach means it then becomes collaborative rather than full on at each other. So the first one is to pacify. So to help the receiver know that you're not here as a threat. So this picks up on some of the work of like Paul Dix, When Adults Change, Everything Changed, the language that we use to enable the receiver to hear that we're not the enemy. So we might start with something like, I'd really like to help you. I'd really like to improve relationships with your colleagues. So the first thing they hear is you're here about helping. It's also about acknowledging any emotion that's there. So if someone's coming in a bit nervous, I can see you're a bit nervous about a conversation. I want to reassure you, I want to help in a scenario, so that you're noting and acknowledging emotion. So that picks up the Steve Peters chimp paradox stuff, acknowledge the emotion in somebody so that they feel recognized and heard. So the first one is to pacify. The next one is a really clear purpose. So this is about the why of the conversation rather than the what. So if we go back to our earlier one with this
Yeah.
imaginary Bernard with his
Bernard
body
with his
odor,
body.
the what of the conversation is his body odor. The why
Mm,
of the conversation about this is actually about relationships with
mm,
colleagues. If we get really clear ourselves on the reason why we're having this, so I've got far more energy to have a conversation with Bernard about helping him build better relationships than I've got energy talking about his body odor, because body odor feels really uncomfortable, feels very negative. Whereas actually the purpose
mm,
behind my conversation is about relationship with colleagues. So after we've done the pacify, we explain, Bernard, the reason I'd like to have this conversation with you is I want to talk to you about something that's going to really help develop your relationship with your colleagues. And so all I'm going to chat
mm,
to you about now, this is what sits behind. I want to really ensure that
mm,
you have a strong relationship with your colleagues. So purpose is the second one. Then you get to the point. That brings out what you said earlier, what we were talking around,
mm.
clarity,
Yeah.
that you're really specific and you point out the moment and the issue. So we don't just say something like, Bernard, you always smell.
Yeah.
Because if you think about any time any of us have been told you always,
Yeah.
our immediate reaction is, no, I don't.
No,
No, I
no,
haven't.
no.
Because in reality, we don't always smell, or we are
Mm,
not always late, or whatever the issue
mm,
is. So we need to be specific. So we would say, Bernard, at the meeting on Friday, in the staff room, on Tuesday when we were in the coffee area. You know, you're quite specific about when these happen, and then we get to the point of what the issue is. And so, in the case of Bernard, we might just say, Bernard, on these particular dates, there was some body odor coming from you that meant it's going to make it uncomfortable for those around you,
mm.
which then, and I can take them back to the purpose, is going to impact on your relationship with
Relationship.
others. And we might then also go back to the pacify at this point. It doesn't mean just because we've covered it once, we don't cover it again. We can acknowledge, I can acknowledge, Bernard, me chatting to this about you can feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Mm,
I want you to know, though, the reason that I'm having this conversation is because I want to help you with your relationship with colleagues and I want the best for you. So, again, we go back to these other P's, but we are
mm.
specific about the point.
Yeah.
We may then, depending on the topic, we might ask them, is there anything, because we're now coming into the fourth P, which is partnering with them. We
Yeah.
might
So
ask them, is there anything that's contributing towards that that I'm not aware
aware
of?
of.
And then we will also ask them, what is it you think you could do to help this? And that's where we might also then pick up the bit you mentioned earlier, what is it I can do to help you? Um, Now, with an incident like Bernard and his body odor, we might then also be saying to him, I don't know if you're aware of this, Bernard. Sometimes, actually, when we have body odor, we're not even aware of it ourselves. And again, we might bring it back to the
Mm,
pacify and the purpose. I want to help you with relationship with colleagues, and I know this is difficult. But is there anything
mm,
you are aware of now that I've mentioned this to you that may be contributing towards this? And they might
mm.
then have a medical reason towards it, and you might then be able to acknowledge that and say, okay, we can see this as a challenge for
Yeah.
you. What is it? And it's always a full stop, never a but. I can see this as a challenge, but then negates what we've just said. So in partnering with them, that fourth P, what is it you think you could do differently that you maybe haven't tried before? Is there anything I can help you with, that you then
Mm,
work through that with them?
yeah.
Now, obviously, with something like body odor, it might not be about they're not using
Yeah.
deodorant. It could be that their washing detergent isn't strong enough, and there's
Mhm.
sort of smell staying in the clothes. It might be that actually that t-shirt now
Yeah.
has gone. You
Gone,
know,
yeah.
it
Beyond
can't. It's gone beyond
salvation. Yeah.
salvation, and so you might need to have that different
Mm,
conversation. Might be worth getting some new clothing
mm,
then, trying a different detergent, trying a new
mm,
deodorant, depending what it is you're talking with them about. And then the last P is you plan with them about some things they're
mm,
going to try. Now, we've just given the example of Bernard with his body odor, but it could also be about, if we're looking at a performance related
mm.
issue, e.g., you're regularly late. Now, again, we don't say you're always late, you were late on this date, you were late on that date,
Yeah.
in the specifics when you're coming to the point. You're partnering with them to talk about some steps they might take. That
Mhm.
last P is planning. What is it you're going to do by when? What is it I'll do by when? And then you agree when you're going to meet with them. So to run through the 5 Ps again, first thing, to pacify,
Mm,
help them see that you're not the enemy, you're here to help, and you recognize their emotion. Then you talk to them about the purpose, which is the reason why behind your conversation, not the what. Then you get to the point, your specifics about what happened when and where and what the issue is. And then you partner with them. So you ask them, what is it they think they could do about it? Is there anything you need to be aware of and what you might bring to it? And then you plan together. So those 5 P's, I think, give you a simple structure to follow through. But I think also with that purpose and that pacify, it's really helping you to hone in that you are here to help. And that's where that caring personally bit comes in really key for them.
And that, Colin, is sounding like a really caring, respectful way of managing a pretty tricky conversation to have with a work colleague. And I can think of people who would say, well, actually, I just say it as it is. I'm fed up of this. Bernard, you stink. And so how do we stop what's perceived as just, I'm just a straight talker, taking over and simply being blunt or
rude
to people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think you've got radical candor if you're just being blunt. That, in one sense, perhaps is just the candor, isn't it? It's about being straight talking, but you've forgotten the radical bit. And the whole reason it's called radical candor is it's not just blunt; it has that caring, personally bit about it. So that is about empathy. Again, if we're going to hold that dial in the right place, we don't want the empathy overplaying so that we're so soft soapy that the message is lost, but neither do we want to be the other end where we're just being blunt and rude about it, because blunt and rude will only get you the reaction back again. Sometimes we might start with the intention of radical candor, but we get a reaction perhaps we weren't expecting, despite perhaps the 5 Ps or despite us caring, and it presses our button. So I guess the key thing I would advise people is use the power of pause. If we're getting that reaction, just pause and ask. One of the key W's here for me is what's needed here. So if someone is coming back at us, which is now causing us to want to be blunt and rude, and now come back and say, yeah, but Bernard, you just stink, or Jemima, you are just late and it's winding up your colleagues. It's just pause and ask ourselves what's needed here. And one of the things that I think is needed here is that empathy. What's it like for Bernard or Jemima sitting there? What am I seeing? I'm seeing a reaction, and this is going to evoke a reaction in me. And that pause, just allowing ourselves, just puts us on hold from reacting, and instead we can respond. So I think there's 2 bits, isn't it? There's the one who just comes in and says, I'm going to be like this from the word go. If you're like that from the word go, you're going to get the fight, flight, or freeze response because someone is being threatened by your bluntness and rudeness. So that doesn't actually get you anywhere.
It won't move the situation.
No, it's not going to get the proper deep engagement from someone. So that candor, yes, there's candor there, but there isn't the radical candor of the caring element. So that you are going to get one of those 3 responses because they'll be under threat. If you've started with good intentions, but you're getting a response back from them that's perhaps aggressive in tone, and you're now wanting, your natural reaction is to fight back, is to press pause and just go, what's needed here? And what's needed here might be, I can see this has caused a reaction in you. Should we just take 5? That might be what's needed. Or what might be needed here is just to listen and to acknowledge how it feels for them, so that you can still maintain the radical candor rather than just the bluntness, because the bluntness doesn't work for anyone. So I know time's flying away from us, as it always does in the Leadership Lounge. Let's just pull out a couple more bits around it, and we talked about timing. So one of the things you talked about at the right time was when you're not rushed. Is there anything else that comes for the right time for having this radical candor conversation?
I think it's about when, right at the beginning, I said it's about, radical candor is about being aware and noticing when there's an issue. And I think it's if you take that a little bit further, it's when you're aware that there's an issue or problem, which actually is not just a little bump in the road, a little one-off thing for a particular reason, because you don't want to be challenging people on something you know, for example, you know, if Jemima is always on time and one day she's late 'cause there's been a problem, you're not going to leap in there and go, "Can I just
Yeah.
speak to you?"
Yeah.
It's when it's something which is having a negative impact, and you've been aware of it and maybe kept an eye on it, and it's like, no, this is not going away, it's not changing, it wasn't a one-off, there's a danger this is going to become a regular thing.
Yeah.
It's, you know, that's maybe when you're going, right, I need to have a conversation around this, and maybe not in the midst of an issue. You know, if there's a, we all have moments when, you know, you kind of reach that crisis level, something unexpected happens, people are having to deal with it. And if that's the point during which somebody is, you know, becomes apparent they're not pulling their weight, they're not aware of what they are supposed to be doing, that's not the point to be going, you should know when this happens, this is what you do. You need to wait till you're out of all that chaos and do it in a calm, quiet, measured way, I think.
Yeah. So it's about giving space for them to calm and come to it later on.
Yeah.
It is about not just picking up on any tiny little thing and being harsh on
it,
people.
yeah.
So it's noting the level. So again, to be clear for our listeners, if sometimes there could be one-off events that we must talk to them about,
yeah,
because they're inappropriate behaviours. But if there are some smaller issues we've just been monitoring, but those smaller have built up,
yeah,
then it's noting the time to do that. But we're not jumping on people for
Yeah.
tiny little things
Yeah.
and wheeling out our radical candor conversation
yes,
every single moment.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering whether, just to, as we pull our conversation to a close, just thinking about how we make it safe for people. If we explore that together, what we say and do as part of that process.
Yeah, I think choice of language is really important in making people feel safe. And, you know, as you've already said, you don't talk about the always. So, and if I was thinking about data, I wouldn't, you know, don't say to somebody, "You're rubbish at data."
Yeah.
Your language is the data that you are currently providing to the team doesn't enable them to do what they need to be doing.
Yeah.
That's quite a neutral statement in that respect. It's about being succinct. And one thing that I find particularly helpful when I'm thinking through how I'm going to approach something is to think about statements, not questions. So, for example, if you're talking about punctuality, a statement would be, I need you to arrive on time so we can begin the meeting promptly and make the most effective use of everybody's time that they're giving to this meeting, rather than, do you think you could be on time? Because they might go, no.
Yeah, or they might say yes, and you still haven't.
And you know, it still hasn't made it. Or, and do you think you could be on time? It's you know, it's giving people an option. It's not really reinforcing the seriousness of this. And in a similar vein, people won't feel safe and secure if you give them a vague, there's room for improvement. Because now you've told them you think they can improve, but you haven't told them what they need to improve, why they need to improve it, or asked if they need help in improving it. You've just landed with them with this vague, there's room for improvement. It doesn't really tell them anything. And that just leaves people feeling really unsettled. And I think as well, it doesn't help people hear what you're saying and feel secure in the way they're being dealt with if you use we when you mean you.
Yeah.
We need to arrive on time. Actually, no, because I arrive on time anyway. It's you I need to. That kind of thing is not helpful.
Yeah.
We all need to up our game. Really?
Yeah.
You know, you sitting here telling me you need to improve as well, when, or are you just saying I need to improve? It just makes it all a little bit insecure and a bit, you know, exactly what are you telling me? Whereas if you have that clarity, that directness, that succinctness, then people know where they stand. Right, I've heard you. I'm not doing the data in the way that other people need it. I need to change the way in which I do the data. Right, now I can go away and do that.
Yeah. One of the things that, as you were talking, I was reflecting on, there's a great phrase about blame the process, not the person, which
Yeah.
is looking at the kind of Kaizen method in terms of we look at our systems that are failing, not necessarily individuals. Now, we have to be a bit careful of that one if we're giving feedback, because actually it is about the person that's doing it. But what I would draw out from that is that we talk about somebody's actions, because actions then will link to guilt, because guilt is about an action you've taken. What we don't want to do is move into shame, which is about the person. So I think one of the things that can help people feel safer is when we are talking about the what and we are being specific, we are talking about the actions they've taken. So we are talking about them not turning up on time rather than them as a person. We're talking about the action, which you've kind of described there. And the other bit that I'm reflecting on is actually about our relationship with them. We are spending time with them as individuals, getting to know them getting to know us, and there is relationship rather than the first conversation we're having is around performance or in poor old, but our imaginary Bernard's case is body odor. That there is some form of relationship there, so that when we're talking at the beginning about, I want to help you, they've built that sense of trust with you in the first place. That I think is part of the seed bed for having those radical candor conversations.
Yeah, and hopefully because you've put time into those relationships, they already know that you care about them. So when you say that, because I care, they're not thinking, oh, do you? I didn't know that.
Because I think that's where radical candor is. It has to be genuine care. If it just feels like, oh, someone is following a 5P process without actually really caring about me in this moment, then their kind of guardrail will be up against you in that process. So time's flown away from us. So to draw us together, we normally have the top tips. So what's your top tip with regards to radical candor?
I think it comes back to that statement that's embedded in the culture of your organisation, and it's about talk to people, not about them. And if there is something that you feel you want to go and be moaning to somebody else about, that's giving you a clear message. I need to have a conversation with the actual person, not talk to everybody else about it.
Yeah, because that again comes back to that genuine care stuff.
Yeah.
Because if you talk to people over there, they can't do anything about it. It's this person that is the only person that can do something about it. Yeah. For me, it comes back to that genuine care, and that we are asking ourselves, what is it I want for this person? Which again links to that purpose bit. What do I want from this person? We had our imaginary Bernard. I want him to have better relationships, and all the while his body odor is there, he's not going to have that better relationship. I want this person to get on well with his colleague, and all the while they keep turning up late on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. It's going to impact their relationship. So I think for me, getting clear on our driver for this conversation, which should always be driven by, I genuinely want the best for this person, then I think it makes it easier to have those radical candor conversations. So, Anna, thank you for joining me again on the Leadership Lounge. We've covered a lot today. Hopefully our conversation has helped people with some ideas and structure on how to hold those conversations more easily. So thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. And thank you everyone for joining us on the Leadership Lounge. And we look forward to you joining us again next month.